Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone in the room and online to Swansea University and the School of Law for this event organised by the Children's Legal Centre, the Children's Commissioner for Wales and the Observatory on Human Rights and Social Justice. Our focus for the event is going to be a children's rights approach to tackling child poverty, with contributions from the Children's Commissioner and my colleague here at Swansea University, Dr. Rhian Croak. Before introducing our speakers, I do need to do some housekeeping. So briefly, the event is going to last about an hour. We're going to begin with some remarks from our speakers, and then there'll be an opportunity for comments and questions. For those of you in the room, there is no planned fire drill, at least as far as I'm aware. So if you hear the alarm, you should proceed out of this door and into the car park. Okay, I want to say something about the context for today. The event is, I think, a demonstration of the strength of the working relationship between the Children's Legal Centre, the Observatory and the Children's Commissioner, which I think at least is a partnership that promotes research on children's rights to generate impact for children and young people. And the benefits of the working relationship is nowhere more obvious than in the development of the right way, which, as many of you will already know, is guidance for professionals on what it means to adopt a children's rights approach in public services. We at the Observatory we're very grateful for the financial and practical support provided by the Children's Commissioner in 2016, which enabled us to develop a principled and pragmatic model of a children's rights approach. And we've been greatly appreciative of the work by the Commissioner's Office to develop this into user-friendly guidance, referred to as the right way, and to take this work forward through the development of specific guidance to cover a children's rights approach to ALN, to education and to social care. And that brings me to the focus of today and the most recent in this series of guidance, which is the Right Way supplementary guidance on children's rights approach to tackling poverty. The guidance was developed collaboratively by the Observatory, the Children's Legal Centre and the Children's Commissioner, and it seeks to apply the principled and practical children's rights approach to address the issue of child poverty, and in particular to help to support public bodies to deliver on their numerous duties toward children and young people who are experiencing poverty. I'm not going to say anything more about the guidance. I'm going to leave that to our speakers. So let me introduce them. Our first speaker will be Rocio Cifuentes. Rocio is the Children's Commissioner for Wales. She took up the post in April 2022, yeah. Right? Rocio was born in Chile and arrived in Wales with her parents, who were political refugees from Chile. She studied social and political science at Cambridge University and went on to complete a master's in social research methods here at Swansea University. Prior to becoming the Commissioner, Rocio was Chief Executive of East Wales, a Wales-wide organisation supporting ethnic minority young people. She also served as a Wales Committee member of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, as Chair of the Welsh Refugee Coalition, and as a board member of several community-focused organisations. Rocio is also the founder of the charity Mixed Up, which supports young disabled people, and she's been recognised through a number of awards which acknowledge her contribution in several areas of community service. Anyone who knows Rocio will be fully aware that she is a passionate and committed advocate for equality and human rights, something which, along with her wealth of experience, she has now brought to the field of children's rights in Wales. And so to our second speaker, Dr. Rhian Croak. Rhian has over 20 years of experience in children's rights. She has worked in a variety of roles with NGOs and in academia. And again, anyone who knows Rhian will be fully aware of a deep and long-standing commitment to children and their rights. And she channels this commitment into her work where she is a passionate and I think above all an effective advocate for children's rights. We're very fortunate that Rhian is currently the Strategic Litigation and Policy Advocacy Lead for our Children's Legal Centre Wales here at the university. She leads on promoting the use of the law strategically to achieve positive change for children in Wales. And she brings a wealth of experience to the role, having previously worked for Save the Children for over 10 years, where she played a key role with the Wales UNCRC monitoring group and to promote policy and legislative change to embed children's rights in Wales. She was also involved in the successful campaign to establish a Welsh Youth Parliament. If you know Rhian, you'll know it's going to be difficult for me to list the activities in which she's currently involved because these are numerous and wide-ranging, but I will say that her work covers child poverty, UNCRC implementation, tackling discrimination against children, youth justice, and asylum and immigration. She also chairs the All Wales Children's Rights Strategic Litigation Group. And so we're very fortunate to have two excellent speakers to introduce you to a children's rights approach to tackling child poverty. And I'm not going to say anything more, I'm simply going to hand over to Rossio.
Thank you very much, Diolch, Simon. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me and my team to be part of this important event today. A warm welcome to all of you in the room. Lovely to see some familiar faces and some people I don't know. And also welcome to everyone who's joining us online. Today is all about talking about a children's rights approach to tackling child poverty and how it's going to work. Rhian will introduce the legislative and policy framework supporting a children's rights approach to poverty. And then I will go into more of the practical aspects of how a children's rights approach can practically support organisations to tackle poverty. So we'll be doing a bit of a double act. And Rhian will go first and then I will follow. But before we do that, we thought it would be interesting and a little bit of fun to start with a very short quiz. You can see the questions there in front of you, which I'm sure most of you will know the answers to, but we'll just test you to start with. So, question one, and we'll just take hands up in the room. I suppose there's enough here for now, but if you're online, feel free to write the answers in the chat. So, question one, how many rights do children have? And I'll take hands up in the room. Go on. Sorry?
I've got 42 in my head.
I'll go for,
Any other answers? Simon?
I'll go for 41.
Oh, 41. Okay.
Lots and lots.
Definitely right. Definitely right.
Yeah,
41 in the UNCRC, but then all the rest of it. So, UDHR.
Okay. So why is the 41? Like I had 42 in my head, so I will just briefly go back to you, expert Simon, on why is it 41, not 42?
I think the 42 one is the one about promoting knowledge and understanding, which is not a right for children, it's an obligation on the state.
Ah, very good, very good. So we have all learned something today. Thank you very much. Second question, what age does the UNCRC cover? Go on, Katie.
I'm too scared now.
Yeah, I know, I'm scared as well.
I'm not 20.
Oh, Alison, you're shaking your head.
I thought it went higher. I thought it went above 18, but I can't remember.
Okay, we'll take one more answer from the room. It is, I believe, 0 to 18.
Is it?
Yes, phew. Yes. You know, my office in some cases can support young people who are care experienced until they're older, but the UNCRC itself technically goes up until the age of 18. So, well done online if you had that correct as well. Third question, how old is the UNCRC?
55 now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I can't do, yeah.
Do you know when it was born?
Well, I would say it was born in 1989, but I can't, off the top of my head, work that out as an age now.
36.
Is it
36
36?
this year.
This year, yeah.
Any other answers? Because I think that one is correct, yes. It was born in 1989, so it's 36. So it's, you know, in the prime of its life. So good, yes. Good, happy birthday to the UNCLC. And last question, who is responsible for upholding children's rights?
You.
Partly, but not entirely.
Is it all public bodies?
Public bodies as well. Any other answers? They're all right so far.
Anyone specified as a duty bearer? For adults as well, parents.
Parents, yeah.
Basically all of us adults really should be doing it.
All adults are duty bearers of children's rights, yes. Yes, so anyone who's not a child, technically. Well, good. I think we've all learned something, so thank you very much. So just to go back to the topic of today then, which is poverty. Thank you. Child poverty, and just to reinforce really the importance of this session and this discussion today, because it's focusing on such a stubborn and unfortunately increasingly prevalent and pervasive issue, which we know is, you know, the official figure is around 30% of children who live in Wales live in child poverty, and that figure hasn't really shifted, you know, in a couple of decades. And, you know, the danger is that that becomes a normalised situation that we just stop reacting to and stop even, you know, realising what that actually means. In my work, I meet so many children and young people on a very regular basis who are deeply affected by their experience of child poverty, and it means that they may not be able to afford to put anything in their lunchbox to get to school. They may not be able to get to school because they may not be able to afford the transport to get there. They may not be able to go to a friend's birthday party because, you know, they feel too embarrassed that they don't have the money to buy them a present or a card even. And, you know, they may face a school holiday with very little to do because, as we know, family trips and holidays are just it's so expensive and out of bounds for so many families. So it really pervades and impacts on children and young people so intensely, and these impacts are often also lifelong. And we have to all, you know, redouble, triple, you know, our efforts to change that and to challenge people around us to do more to change that. So that's what today is about. It's about equipping the duty bearers, the organisations, with the information and the tools to help you all to be part of that challenge. So I'm now going to hand back to Rhian to give you the legislative context.
So hello everybody, a warm welcome, and thank you Simon and Rossio for the introductions. I'm really pleased to have worked with Simon at the Observatory and the Children's Commission Office for several years, promoting the importance of a children's rights approach, and to be here today to discuss embedding a children's rights approach to child poverty in the work of public bodies. Simon and I have most recently developed a briefing on law and policy frameworks relevant to a children's rights approach to child poverty. Our briefing specifically addresses the context in Wales where legislative and policy commitments to human rights and children's rights are foundational to all public policies affecting children. And the briefing helpfully aims to bring all this information into one document to support both public bodies and third sector agencies in understanding and using these frameworks to help address child poverty. So the briefing is a useful background document to the Children's Commissioner's Children's Rights Approach Guide that Rossi will introduce shortly. And I'm going to give you a brief overview today to some of the main elements of a briefing, but I do encourage you to access it, and the link will be included at the end of the presentation. So the first section of the briefing introduces us to how the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights relates to addressing poverty. While there is no specific right to live free from poverty in international law, poverty is seen as a human rights issue. And the Covenant guarantees rights that are crucial to tackling poverty, including the right to social security, an adequate standard of living, health and education. The UK as state party to the Convention is obligated to respect, protect and fulfil these rights, and this means avoiding actions that worsen poverty, safeguarding vulnerable populations from the negative impact of poverty, and taking proactive steps to ensure people can enjoy their rights, particularly by allocating resources to meet the needs of those in poverty. Very recently, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights reported on the UK State Party and devolved administration's progress and communicated multiple instances where they are found to be falling short, particularly in relation to child poverty, long-term austerity and welfare reform. In the briefing, we also highlight the important connection between the Covenant and sustainable development, stressing that addressing poverty is essential for achieving the broader global sustainable development goals. Next slide, please. We then outline key UK and Welsh general legal frameworks relevant to addressing child poverty. These legal frameworks emphasise the duty of public bodies to uphold equality, prevent socio-economic disadvantage, uphold human rights and promote sustainable development. We make reference to the Equality Act 2010, which does not directly protect against poverty, but does provide important tools for addressing inequalities that overlap with socio-economic disadvantage. In particular, the socio-economic duty in the Equality Act requires public authorities in Wales to consider how their strategic decisions give due regard to the need to reduce inequalities in outcome resulting from social economic disadvantage. And this came into effect in Wales in March 2021 and applies to various public bodies such as Welsh ministers, local authorities and health boards. It supports a proactive preventive approach, recommending that equality impact assessments are undertaken to consider how decisions might help to reduce the inequalities associated with socioeconomic disadvantage. And public bodies can be held accountable via judicial review or through policy advocacy, complaints mechanisms and public scrutiny. We also make reference to the Human Rights Act, which incorporates the rights from the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law. And public bodies in Wales must comply with human rights obligations under the Human Rights Act. The Human Rights Act does not guarantee socio-economic rights, for example, the right to housing, food or adequate standard of living. But although not a comprehensive anti-poverty tool, the Human Rights Act does offer important legal avenues for challenging state inaction in relation to poverty, for example, protection from discrimination, the right to life, private and family life and education. To be proactive and preventive in approach, it is also recommended that human rights impact assessments are used in the proofing of policies for compliance with these human rights. And individuals, including children, can bring legal action if their rights under this legislation are violated. Alternative accountability methods include policy advocacy, complaints and public scrutiny. We then reference the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which places a legal duty on public bodies in Wales to improve the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of the country. It aims to ensure that today's decisions do not compromise the well-being of future generations. While the Act does not explicitly mention poverty, it provides a framework of obligations to tackle its root causes and impacts in a long-term preventative and integrated way. And the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as we know, requires public bodies to promote sustainable development by meeting 7 wellbeing goals. Relevant public bodies include local authorities again, health boards and many others. And again, a preventive approach is advised with regards to planning processes and the implementation of the wellbeing goals. And the Act does not give individuals the right to directly claim a breach, but public bodies can be held accountable through judicial review or policy advocacy, complaints and scrutiny. Next slide, please. Thank you. We then turn to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the main focus of today, which includes fundamental rights for children, many of which are relevant to addressing child poverty. The UNCRC is the most widely ratified and important legal document for children globally. It guarantees 41 fundamental rights referred to as articles to all children under the age of 18 years. And the UNCRC brings all human rights, civil, political, and economic, social and cultural rights into one comprehensive document. While these rights obligations are the ultimate responsibility of the UK state party, the UK government, all branches of the state are required to contribute to implementation of the UNCRC for the exercise of the powers available to them. There is no international court that can try violations against the UNCRC, but since 1991, a global committee of 18 experts has been monitoring the implementation of the UNCRC in countries that have ratified it. And the committee holds regular sessions to review government's progress made in fulfilling their obligations under the UNCRC. Next slide, please. So in the short time I have available today, I'll give you an overview to some of the UNCRC articles in relation to child poverty, but I do recommend you read the convention in its entirety, as all of the articles are indivisible and interrelated. So firstly, Article 2 makes clear that no child should face discrimination on any grounds in accessing their rights. For example, a child's right to survive and develop should not be undermined due to reasons of discrimination or status of the child. According to Article 6, every child has the right to survive and develop to their maximum potential, which, as we know, poverty directly impedes. Survival and development is not just about preparing a child for adulthood, it's about child's development in the here and now. And the UNCRC recognises that children go through a rapid process of development and must be supported at every stage. Also, in accordance with Article 4 of the UNCRC, it is made clear that governments at all levels should take measures to the maximum extent of available resources to implement all social, economic and cultural rights. And the UN Committee asserts that when budgets are planned, the proportion of expenditure on children must be made transparent and that sufficient expenditure is allocated to support children and disadvantaged children. Furthermore, the best interests of the child, Article 3, must always be a primary consideration in government and public body decision-making. And for example, when developing or proofing poverty policies, strategies, or ensuring appropriate standards. The UN Committee, however, asserts that you can't determine what was in a child's best interests without hearing from children. The UNCRC, by conceptualising children as rights holders, is a groundbreaking legal document because it acknowledges children's agency and that a child's voice must be heard and acted upon. So, for example, according to Article 12 of the UNCRC, children's views should be taken into account and given due weight in any decision-making that affects them. This also concerns decisions that are made by governments and other public bodies that relate to child poverty. Children must be presumed capable of forming their own views, and it should be recognised that they have the right to express them. The UN Committee communicates that children's views should also be taken into account in the design, the delivery, the monitoring and the evaluation of services, and children should be able to inform what services are needed, what are the barriers to access, what will make good quality services for children, and always be given feedback on what has actually changed. They also assert that children must be able to complain and have access to child-friendly complaints mechanisms. This is complemented by the UN Committee making clear in relation to Article 24 the right of the child to the highest attainable standard of health, that governments must ensure that services are available, accessible, appropriate and of good quality, and that all children can benefit from them, with special attention given to underserved areas and disadvantaged populations, such as children living in poverty. And recognising that specific groups of children may be more likely to experience poverty, such as disabled children, care-experienced children, children from ethnic minority groups, children who are experiencing asylum. And it's important to note that the right to health includes the wide range of factors that help children to achieve the highest attainable standard of health. This means the wider social determinants of health must be addressed, that is, the conditions in which children are born, grow and develop. And Article 24 focuses on the importance of safe water, sanitation, food, housing, health-related information and education. Failure to achieve the right to health is demonstrated to escalate a child's experience of poverty and can cause reduced life expectancy. The UNCRC sets further minimum standards of provision that all children are entitled to, with Article 27, the right to an adequate standard of living, of pivotal importance, calling on governments to implement the right of every child to a standard of living adequate for a child's physical, mental, spiritual, moral and social development. It also makes clear that appropriate measures must be taken to assist parents and others responsible for the child to implement this right, and in case of need provide material assistance and support programmes, particularly with regard to nutrition, clothing and housing. And Article 18 confirms that parents have the primary responsibility for children, but that governments must provide assistance to parents and legal guardians in the performance of their child-rearing responsibilities. And this is reinforced through Article 26, which grants children the right to social security, and that governments should take into consideration the circumstances of the child and the persons that have responsibility for the maintenance of the child in the granting of social benefits. Article 28 of critical importance, the right to access and education, with failure to realise the right, evidence to have significant impacts that can exacerbate a child's experience of living in poverty, and fulfilment of the right, evidence to create opportunities to escape a life of poverty. Article 31, the right to play, rest and leisure, also critical, recognising the importance of opportunities for children to play, participate in sport, encouraging engagement with others in society, extending social and peer networks more broadly, reducing exclusion, and contributing to optimal social, emotional and physical development. For example, reductions in obesity and mental health issues. These rights and many more in the UNCRC are all relevant when children are accessing or using public body services. Their effective realisation can contribute to the eradication of child poverty, children's optimal health, well-being and development, and what is in a child's best interests. Taking a children's rights lens on child poverty helps us understand that child poverty is multifaceted and that it requires a holistic response. So that is a rapid overview to the UNCRC and its interrelationship to child poverty, but I do encourage you to read the entire convention. And I think one of my colleagues might put it in the chat. Thank you. Next slide, please. Also of great significance to children's rights was when the UNCRC was indirectly incorporated into Welsh law via the Rights of Children and Persons Wales measure, requiring Welsh ministers to give due regard to the UNCRC when exercising any functions, such as policy making, developing legislation and budgetary decisions. And the due regard duty means that proper consideration must be given to all UNCRC articles, including those impacting on child poverty. So key provisions of the rights measure include Welsh ministers must create and publish a scheme outlining how they ensure compliance with the duty and report every 2.5 years on progress, consider recommendations to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, undertake children's rights impact assessments to assess the impact of policy, legislative and budgetary proposals, and promote knowledge and understanding of the UNCRC. And failure to comply with the due regard duty could result in judicial review, and alternatively public accountability can be pursued through policy advocacy complaints or raising issue with Senate members and Senate committees. So the due regard duty of the UNCRC also applies to certain public authorities in social care, health and education, as extended by the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014 and the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal Act 2018. For consistency and coherence and to support robust accountability to children, we would like to see the duty extended to all public bodies in Wales, but fundamentally we'd like to see similar legislation as in Scotland that has directly incorporated the UNCRC, which would mean that all public bodies must act compatibly with all rights in the UNCRC, and children as individuals can bring a legal action if their rights are violated. Next slide, please. As noted in the previous slide, the Welsh Government must take into consideration the recommendations of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child monitors the implementation of the UNCRC in the UK, providing concluding observations every 5 years. And the Welsh Government must take these into consideration. Child poverty has been a consistent concern since the UNCRC was ratified by the UK State Party in 1992. And the committee's June 2023 report again highlights child poverty as a continuing concern, offering several key recommendations. The committee recommended tracking systems that monitor transparently resources allocated to children in terms of eliminating disparities. They also recommended budgetary allocations for disadvantaged children to mitigate austerity measures, and in an economic crisis to not instigate regressive measures that can affect the enjoyment of children's rights. In Wales, we are witnessing, unfortunately, the impact of austerity. We have seen policies of regression, for example, the decision to end free school meals in the holidays. And I welcome being corrected, but I have not seen much evidence as yet of children's rights budgeting at the national or the local level. With regards to malnutrition and food insecurity, we are still seeing this in the Welsh context, which is astonishing and heartbreaking in the 21st century. We also have high levels of obesity, with over a quarter of children being obese, which also correlates, as we know, with markers of deprivation. With regards to existing policies to end child poverty, there is the Welsh Government Child Poverty Strategy. However, we still do not have clear targets and measurable indicators for eradicating child poverty, like in Scotland, that would ensure better and transparent monitoring and accountability to help drive forward action and see evidence change. It would also be good to see all public bodies publishing and making available their child poverty strategies in Scotland. We are also witnessing the continued failure of the UK government to remove the punitive 2-child limit, whereas in Scotland they are using devolved legislation to mitigate its impact, and also they have the Scottish Child Payment. that is evidence to be helping to buck the trend on the rise in child poverty, that in Wales is alarmingly set to increase by the end of the decade. And then in relation to housing and homelessness, we have the concerning evidence from the recent excellent Children's Commissioner for Wales report that we are still failing children in terms of provision of affordable and adequate social housing, and consequently children are facing inadequate temporary accommodation and homelessness. Finally, of significant relevance to today's discussion, the committee asks that all measures to combat child poverty comply with the child rights approach, with a particular focus on children in disadvantaged populations. So all these recommendations should be taken into consideration by all those working to address child poverty. And the Welsh Government's progress on these recommendations was last reported in July 2024. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next slide focuses on Children and Families Wales Measure 2010, which places a duty on the Welsh Government and public bodies to contribute to eradicating child poverty. This piece of legislation is often neglected or forgotten about, so I do encourage you to familiarise yourself with it. This legislation, again, does not allow children to claim their individual socio-economic rights, but instead encourages an approach of holding government to account to contribute to the eradication of child poverty. Key provisions include Section 1, which sets out 13 aims that contribute to the eradication of child poverty, including aims which relate to household income, material deprivation and social factors, very linked actually to human rights and children's rights principles. Section 2, which requires Welsh authorities to publish a strategy for eradicating child poverty. Section 3, which obligates Welsh ministers to report every 3 years on progress towards child poverty eradication. Section 4, local authorities can include their child poverty strategy in their local wellbeing plan underneath their obligations under Section 39 of the Wellbeing and Future Generations legislation. And Section 12, very importantly, requires authorities to facilitate children's participation in the decisions that affect them. So I've not referred to all the duties today, but there are others which are also of essential importance in this legislation. For example, play, childcare, integrated family support, assessing the needs of children where, for example, their parents need community care services or health conditions. In the next penultimate slide, I have outlined key structures and mechanisms that should be powerfully driving forward positive action on child poverty in Wales. So we have public service boards as established under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which coordinate public services, and guidance makes clear that they must consider children's rights and child poverty, and local wellbeing plans should integrate these considerations, focusing on positive outcomes for children. We have the regional partnership boards, which must produce regional plans and reports, demonstrate citizen engagement and co-production, including with children. And they must also have due regard to the UNCRC and their functions and consider child poverty impacts in their actions. We also had the recently formed corporate joint committees established by regulations in 2022. And they are responsible for monitoring wellbeing objectives, addressing socioeconomic inequalities, and must also demonstrate how they are contributing to the eradication of child poverty in Wales. These collaborative mechanisms should be aiming to address child poverty, ensure children's rights, and align with broader social goals and objectives in Wales. However, it's not always that easy to determine what all these mechanisms are doing, and it would be strongly recommended that all public bodies publish their strategies that address child poverty. So to summarise, in Wales, public bodies sit within a landscape of human rights, children's rights and equalities, and child poverty-related obligations that flow down from international human rights treaties and UK Welsh legislation and guidance. Specifically regarding children's rights, the UNCRC is the most globally ratified and powerful legal document for children, and the concluding observations of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child present an authoritative framework for action on many children's rights issues, including child poverty. The Rights Measure 2011 makes it clear that Welsh Government must consider children's rights in the exercise of all their functions, and this includes children's rights relating to child poverty. And there is an expectation that other public bodies do the same. And this is made clear in guidance for public service boards via the Wellbeing legislation, but also in other legislation, for example, in the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the Additional Learning Needs legislation. The Children and Families Measure 2010, also another important piece of legislation, and presents opportunities to review whether Welsh Government and other public authorities are developing robust strategies within wellbeing plans to eradicate child poverty, and also are they consulting children on their developments. So in developing a supplementary guide on a children's rights approach to child poverty, we took these frameworks into consideration, which Rossi will now introduce in relation to the 5 principles of a children's rights approach, which helpfully sets out, we hope, what public bodies can do to translate children's rights into practice.
Thank you, Rhian. Very powerfully and clearly set out, thank you. So yes, I'm going to be talking about what public bodies can actually do to tackle child poverty in the context of that very strong and progressive legislation that we actually have in Wales. And you know, I think knowledge is power, so just a reminder of what's there and what the duties are is really, really useful. So a children's rights approach, it's been mentioned many times. What is it? It's a principled and a practical framework for working with children, which is grounded in the UNCRC. And as Simon mentioned at the beginning, my office worked with the Observatory on Children's Rights to develop this approach, which we have then gone on to call and talk about as the right way. And it is about placing the UNCRC at the very core of planning and service delivery, and making sure that children's rights are actually integrated into every aspect of decision making, policy and practice. It is structured into 5 principles. So that is what we call the right way. The children's rights approach is the 5 principles are, and I'll go through each of these in more detail shortly, but they are firstly embedding the UNCRC, equality and non-discrimination, empowering children, participation and accountability. So they are the 5 principles of a children's rights approach, which are based on the UNCRC. And this is the document that we are really pleased to be launching and talking about today, which this isn't a properly produced version, this is just on a photocopier, but this is what it looks like, and I really urge you to take a good look. I'm sure there are links being shared currently in the chat to this document. It was produced with the Observatory and is a practical guide, so it takes you through in more detail the practical actions that I'll be talking about now, which can be taken to actually do something about child poverty. There's a Welsh version as well, I should say. So to go to the first principle then, embedding the UNCRC. This is all about how children's rights can actually be placed at the core of planning and service delivery, and a couple of examples of actions that are drawn from this guide. One is that local well-being plans that address poverty should directly and expressly acknowledge children's rights as the framework for tackling poverty. So we heard from Rhian about the legislative which requires local well-being plans to respond to and reference child poverty, but we would urge those plans to actually explicitly reference children's rights. A second recommendation and suggested action that we have is that organisations should carry out initial and ongoing evaluation of the levels of knowledge and understanding of children's rights amongst their staff, and particularly the rights and duties that exist to address child poverty. And that should be an exercise which is repeated to measure and gauge staff awareness and understanding of children's rights and duties to tackle child poverty particularly. So they are just 2 examples and suggested actions extracted from the guide. Secondly, going under the principle of equality and non-discrimination, a few suggestions here would be, firstly, using data to analyse the access to services that exist. For example, within local wellbeing plans, we suggest that there could be disaggregated data collected, which enables discrimination to be identified, any discrimination which could relate to poverty or socio-economic disadvantage to be clearly identified. So using the data that's available more effectively to help really see where and how poverty is impacting on local populations. Secondly, in terms of the money that's being spent, we're calling for and arguing within this guide that there should be transparent evidence of the proportion of expenditure on children and how funding is allocated and how that's linked to specific policy intentions to address the issue of children living in poverty. So more transparency is what we would like. We are also just currently, we have been working on a budgeting toolkit with the Observatory, which we hope could help public bodies to be more transparent. And thirdly, we suggest and hope that CRIA, Children's Rights Impact Assessments, and budget impact assessments are regularly and routinely carried out to inform decision making. This is already a duty on, there is already a duty on Welsh Government ministers to carry out CRIAs, Children's Rights Impact Assessments, when they make decisions. But we would like that duty to be extended, and we would certainly like to see the practice to be used far more extensively than it is currently. And all of those actions that I've just been through would address that principle. They are practical actions that could be taken to address that principle of equality and non-discrimination. The third principle is of empowering children. So children's rights shouldn't be something that we just talk about and potentially read and write about. We have to empower children, and sometimes this includes empowering their parents and carers as well, with the information and with the access to actually engage in the services and opportunities which can help them mitigate and navigate their experience of living in poverty. So this might mean, in practical terms, making sure that we produce child-friendly and accessible information which can help children and their families to hold public bodies to account, to make sure that their rights are not being breached, so that they are able to access the breadth of their 41 rights and hold those bodies to account. My office, as many of you will know, provides an advice service that can directly help children or their families or parents or carers to hold public bodies to account if there is a suspected children's rights breach. And I would encourage you to consider accessing that service if you need it, or if you're in the room, to take away a leaflet about the service. There are plenty on the table. So the principle there, just to go back to the principle, is about empowering children with information and knowledge about their rights and how to access them. The fourth principle of a children's rights approach is the principle of participation. And this, how to put that principle into practice, there are a few suggestions that we picked out here. Firstly, and very simply, it is listening to children and making sure that there are structures and systems in place that enable their views to be taken into account in a meaningful way. We have many good practice examples that I'm sure we are all aware of in Wales. We have youth forums as part of local authorities structures. We have youth forums as part of health boards. Many police organisations have children and young people's forums. So there are many structures that are in place. They will vary, I'm sure, as everything does, in terms of how effective they are, and in terms of how meaningful they are, and in terms of how far are they actually going to not only listen to young people's views, but actually consider and seriously consider putting those views and opinions into their practice and into action. So I think that we still have some way to go, but I think the principle of participation certainly will start with having an effective mechanism for listening to children and young people. And in terms specifically of poverty, children who are directly affected by poverty, who are living in poverty, who have that lived experience of poverty, should be involved in decision making and in informing and influencing policies. They need to be included in discussions, not as an afterthought, but from the beginning of policy development stages, and they should be involved in co-producing services, but also in their monitoring and in their evaluation. So it's the complete feedback loop and involving children and young people at all of those stages. And then the last principle, the fifth principle, is a really important one, and it's sort of closing the loop, the feedback loop, and it's the principle of accountability. And it is all about how organisations and institutions need to be accountable to children and young people for the decisions and actions that they've taken on behalf of children and young people that affect directly on their lives. So specific actions that we recommend taking include, you mentioned monitoring frameworks earlier, Rian, so having a clear monitoring framework that does include rights-based targets and measures and interventions and indicators so that their impact can be measured. I heard a phrase earlier which I hadn't heard before, which I liked, which is we need to measure what you treasure. It's a bit of a throwaway one, but it really resonated. And organisations need to use those measures to report back to service users, including children and young people, on how well they're doing and how they're meeting their public duties. So that feedback loop needs to be effective, it needs to be planned for, and it needs to be not just done once, but done in an ongoing, structured and planned way. There need to be far better child-friendly complaint systems so that if a child or a young person is not happy with a system or a provision, that there is a clear way of them being heard and raising their concerns. And we know from our work that my team have done that those systems are not always effective, and there is a lot to do to improve them. And finally, we propose and suggest that organisations need to make sure that their own staff clearly understand their responsibilities and obligations in respect of children's rights in addressing child poverty. So all of the legislation and frameworks that Rian mentioned earlier, I think the challenge there is how does that information get cascaded to staff and practitioners on the ground. And it's not easy because it is complex, but it is legislation that, the purpose of legislation is that it should be used and enacted. So those are the five principles of a children's rights approach that our resource that we have produced goes through in much more detail. So please do take a look. This is free and bilingual, as I said. It is intended to be a practical action for a practical framework for action. So we don't want it just to sit on a shelf. The whole point is that it is taken off that shelf and used to inspire action. My team have worked for many years, as Simon mentioned, I think since 2016, developing a range of resources and developing this children's rights approach. And we have many on our website, so I would encourage you to please have a look. And there are also many printed versions of different guides that we've produced in the room. So we have produced The Right Way to Education, The Right Way to Social Care, and a couple of others that escape me at the moment, but there is a series of these. So the one that we have done on poverty is just the latest specific guidance that we have produced. And they're all very simple and clear, I hope. So please take a look. And I think just to finally end by saying that this collaboration is very powerful and is very productive, and I want to just thank Simon and the team and Rian for all of their hard work in enabling the production of all of these guides. I know there are some others that we talked about that may be in the pipeline, so we've talked about maybe doing one specifically on health, which there's a lot of interest in that idea. But really fundamentally it's about all of us leaving today with this clear message in our minds that children's rights really matter, that they are an effective and legislative tool that can be used to make sure that public bodies are doing all they can and all they should be to actually do something about child poverty and to drive that really awful 30% figure, 1 in 3 children living in circumstances that none of us would wish for our own children. That is just unacceptable and has to end. So thank you very much. I will stop, and I want to hopefully have a little bit of time for some questions and discussion. So diolch yn fawr.
Thank you to both speakers, both Rossio and Rian, for their excellent presentations. I would echo what Rossio said. Please go to the Commissioner's website, make use of the resources. Something I found particularly useful has been the case studies that you're collating, which will give practitioners very concrete examples of what can be done, to add to the examples in the guide, obviously. I'm not going to attempt to summarise the richness of the information that's been communicated by our speakers. Instead, I'll move straight to Q&A.
Unfortunately, the chat's not working for some reason.
Right.
So people at home aren't going to be able to ask questions, but they can respond to the email that they have on the link, and then I'll be able to see the questions.
Okay.
And then we can take questions from in the room.
Okay, we'll take questions from the room, and if anybody online wants to respond with a question via the email, you better get on it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Anthony first then.
I've got a comment and a question. The comment, first of all, is I think it's really reassuring to hear what you're saying, Rossio, and the partnership with the Children's Legal Centre in terms of trying to push for this type of reform. I was at a seminar earlier about Scottish incorporation. They're ahead of the game as far as we're concerned. But it's really nice to see different parts of the UK actually moving in the right direction in all of this. And with that in mind, I just wanted to ask you a question. This is probably a bit of time off, so I'm just being a bit perspective. I'm glad Rian mentioned Section 12 of the Children and Families Measure. We've got, to be blunt, not a lot of evidence that is actually happening, or local authorities are consulting on their participatory arrangements. But I was wondering, and I think you're absolutely right, when you construct these sort of almost data dashboards to find out what's really going on, in your mind and with your team, are you perhaps looking as well at being quite robust in terms of how poverty is dealt with? And one thing that popped into my mind in particular was education rights. So to give you one case that's really been bothering me talking to children, where parents in poorer areas save up and they take the children on holiday, sometimes a little bit of term time, they get penalised for that, and yet they're enriching the life of the child, but they can't do anything else because they haven't got the money. I mean, do you perhaps see an opportunity to challenge Welsh Government policy and to challenge local authority policy to embed that right of the child to have play, to have time with their family, and actually to do what the Curriculum Assessment Act says, which is to have a good state of well-being. I know it's a controversial one, probably good to say they should be in school, but sometimes there's more to life. So I'm throwing that in, it's a bit of an oddball, but I think that is a rights-based issue that perhaps we might want to look at with poverty.
Yeah. Do you want to take a couple of questions?
Yeah, so that's one. Have you got any more? We'll take them in groups. Yeah.
Thanks. Actually, it was decided some time ago that head teachers would have discretion to grant up to 2 weeks, but then the regional partnerships started bringing in rules saying not to do that. So I think it is worth just looking at where that is up to. I just want to read you, this is something that I was sent quite a long time ago. That doesn't matter. My youngest daughter and I became homeless in March 2019. We lived in Bath, where I had moved in 2015 to study at Bath University. Rental prices in Bath are very high, and the first house that we moved into was £1,100 per month. I was entitled to over £900 housing benefit, as well as child tax credits, child benefit, in addition to my student grants and student loans. We were able to manage until the benefits cap was introduced, and my housing benefit was halved. We moved next door into a house share, which reduced our rental costs, but the person with whom we were sharing soon became problematic. He clearly had alcohol problems and was increasingly aggressive and threatening. He moved out, but after that I felt unable to risk another house share situation, and the rental costs were too high for us to remain in Bath. The rest of the story is about coming to Swansea, sofa surfing with family members, presented housing options, trying to get housed. Obviously the woman who wrote this did not finish her studies, so that might have been a route out of poverty for her, which was denied. The point is, we talk about the two-child limit, we talk about the benefit cap. These things are thrown around quite casually. This is the impact. Child homelessness is the impact. So my question, I suppose, is arguably, is it political? I'm always being told off for being political. I don't know how we talk about these things without getting political. If the Welsh Government is serious about tackling child poverty, they need to be campaigning on the Westminster Government to get rid of these benefit caps that enforce child poverty in Wales. And I want to ask, what do you think the appropriateness of that suggestion is? I mean, fundamentally, this is about money, and I will spend all day discussing with people, and anyone who says child poverty is about more than just money. Welsh Government keeps trying to fill the gaps about everything that is more than just money, and in the end, kids are still poor because they don't have enough money. So we've got to release the blocks from Westminster to children having enough money. Having said that, poverty now includes a huge range of people and experiences. Poverty is measured as being a proportion of median, so as median goes down, not only does the poverty rate itself go down, but the proportion of median income that you need to not be in poverty anymore goes up. And actually, is it worth asking the Welsh Government to focus on the children in deepest poverty, on the children experiencing material deprivation, which was set out in the 2010 measure and rarely seems to get revisited now?
Okay. I'm conscious of time, both, so I think maybe take those two questions and then see if we've got any more after that.
Yeah. So on Anthony, your question about responding to this concept of parents being penalised for taking children out of school in term time, we as an office we've always challenged the idea of parents being financially penalised because of that kind of is punishing a child for something they've had no say in. So we have been very clear in our position on that. We have, because we have a casework service, so parents will contact us on occasion with cases like this, but my feeling is that this doesn't actually happen very much, thankfully, and if it did, we would be sort of supporting a parent and child as best we can. But I feel like it's something that is, I don't know, Mary, I hadn't heard about that 2-week discretionary, so maybe we can go back as an office and try and find out if there has been further decisions on that.
So the Regional Educational Consortia were told off by Welsh Government for publicising model policies for schools to adopt, which we will always say, no, don't bother asking.
Yeah.
And although they removed that as an official line, the word is that they're still saying that to schools. So
Okay.
I think it just needs to be reinforced that the law is that head teachers are supposed to use their discretion.
Yeah, no, thank you. We'll go back and check, but I think that's helpful. So thankfully we don't hear about it too much, but I would agree it's concerning. And Mary, on your question and challenge, I think we can't have these conversations without being political, and I don't. Yeah, I'll stand by that. I think it's everything. Decision making is about politics in the end, isn't it? So, but as an office, obviously, in terms of we call on the Welsh Government to challenge the UK Government to pull and use the levers at its disposal to make child poverty better, which includes removing the 2-child limit, and we called for consideration of the Scottish style child payment as well. So we are making those calls to Welsh Government. So indirectly, obviously we're not allowed to make direct calls on the UK Government, but indirectly we can and we do. And clearly the housing crisis as our report has shown, does impact, you know, hugely on children, and the root cause is lack of money and, you know, inequality and growing inequality, and some people having more and more money while some people have less and less. And so, you know, I think I like your suggestion about potentially calling on Welsh Government just to focus on, you know, what you call this, like, children living in material deprivation. I think sometimes terminology around poverty can be a bit confusing, and a more targeted approach may be more helpful at this stage.
Okay. Hannah, any emails? Okay. Any more questions from anyone in the room?
I don't know particularly where I went, bear with me. I wondered in the presentation, I found it really useful with the legislation and things, if there's a place for the Curriculum Act and the UNCRPD in it, so persons with disabilities. I know that there are many groups that are more proportionately affected or disproportionately affected by poverty, but whether there's a place for that convention specifically, I think there's some argument it's more clear, more prescriptive in those rights for disabled people. So I wondered if that was there, and then thinking about the link and the role we know that education can have, notwithstanding the financials of things, in people's social capacity, whether that feeds into it, or whether that is in the detail of the new Right Way guide. So that's my question, and then my comment is just that I think these guides are really welcomed on the ground. I think that the UNCRC is, I haven't got an academic word for it, iconic, I guess, in children's world, isn't it? It's there, and we know it's there, but as a tool for instruction, and I think that these guides are really useful as a tool for analysis in specific contexts where people are going, well, I know what rights are, but when we mix that with our values and then other high stakes accountability legislative drivers, so just a welcome to it really, that another context and probably our biggest children's rights issue. So it's, yeah, that's just a comment.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to take the question?
In terms of the UNCRPD then and the Curriculum Assessment Act, I think we were trying to be very succinct and focused in terms of a kind of clear focus on child poverty. I completely take your points, and it was something that I reflected on. And maybe it's something that we can just add to the briefing if you would recommend that. I'm quite happy to do that, just in terms of actually helping people have a fuller understanding of the links to those pieces of legislation. So yeah, and I totally take your point about the UNCRPD as well. It's a really great document, and it's very clear. And there are so many overlaps, as we know, in terms of disabled parents and disabled children living in poverty. So maybe, yeah, I think it'd be good to kind of do, say, or a link to it. I think that actually it'd be really good to do a very clear children's rights approach guide to the UNCRPD as well. So there are lots of things that we can be doing, and I've been requested to do that by others. So maybe I just need to kind of think a little bit more out of the box about the best way to kind of package it. Because what we're trying to do all the time is package it in a way that's not simple, but accessible, and something that can be picked up off the shelf, and people kind of think, all right, what am I supposed to be doing with this particular issue now? And it's quite, it's as easy as possible, because there's, as you could see, I try to cram a lot into 20 minutes anyway. There's just like such a complex landscape of obligations, and I think it's really overwhelming for public bodies. So what we're trying to do is make it in a way that can be easily understood. But yeah, totally take your points, and I think it will make me reflect a little bit. Thank you.
Sorry, did you have a question? No.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, actually I do, but I didn't have my hand up,
Okay.
so you just tell us.
Right, don't mind.
I saw you leaning forward enthusiastically at one point. I thought there's a question coming over here. So.
I'm just wondering if there's any international approaches that do expressly adopt a children's rights approach specifically to tackling child poverty, and whether we can learn from other countries in that way.
If there are, I'm not aware, so I don't know.
The ground glazing piece of guidance in that.
I don't think there is a great deal out there explicitly in terms of children's rights approach to child poverty. So I think that there's quite a lot of interest online from other countries as well, and other people, in terms of how we are packaging this. Obviously, we've done it in a very Welsh-specific way, but the core of it, as we've tried to convey today, is the UNCRC, which is International Human Rights Treaty, which hopefully will make it very transferable in terms of the 5 principles to lots of others who are actually engaging with this today. So, no, I think it is quite interesting. But I think, I don't know who was it, you mentioned it or Simon, I'm not sure. Is that, you know, it is a great crucible of activity in Wales at the moment in terms of, you know, the children's rights approach and what Welsh government are trying to do and other public bodies are trying to do that. I think there is a real appetite. I think it was Katie actually referred to it, and there's some great examples on the ground, isn't there, of people trying to adopt this approach and trying to integrate it into their way of working and really trying to use a lens, which is the 5 principles, to really think about how we should be working with children in a much better way that really respects, protects and fulfill their rights. So I think people are watching and people are interested, and that's a good thing, but not to say that we can't learn as well. So if you are aware of anything and anybody else, then that's what we want to do: engage, learn, improve. But what this has been based on today is essentially the core principles of the International Human Rights Treaty system. So, yeah.
I mean, just on that, it depends on the entry point very often, whether it's an approach to child poverty or an approach to an issue which is arising as a result of child poverty, like homelessness, for example. So there are examples of schemes which attempt to address homelessness, and there are examples, and I've done work on this myself, where you attempt to address economic policy from a child rights perspective. So it depends on your entry point, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that we could potentially draw on to inform the work in Wales. Okay, any more questions? Anything? No. Okay, well, it just remains for me then to thank our speakers, to thank everyone in the room, to thank those online, and to thank the School of Law for hosting this event. Thank you very much. That's it.